When a goat-loving community advocate clashes with the tyrannical HOA queen, can laughter and therapy goats reshape hearts and challenge the status quo, or will conformity win? With a rather theatrical flair, Pam Hawthorne, the HOA's self-proclaimed royalty, stood atop her invisible throne, clipboard in one hand and a finger-curling pen in the other, ready to write the latest chapter in our community's ongoing saga of absurdity. "Lila, these goats are a clear violation of the community's bylaws," she thundered, her frosted hair bobbing in defiance. "Livestock is not permitted within city limits," as if the goats had conspired to ruin her Saturday morning. Surely such righteous indignation over three adorable and utterly harmless creatures was indicative of a personality that had transformed tea parties into battlegrounds filled with passive-aggressive notes and tightly repressed rage. Her determination was naive, as I couldn't help but snicker behind my mug of warm coffee. In a moment of slapstick whimsy, I glanced at my goats, each munching away on clover while I savored my coffee. "Oh, Pam, you simply must see the therapeutic magic these small horned wonders provide, don't you know? There's an entire cream of the yoga crop waiting to invest in goat yoga sessions, right here in our quaint community." I flashed a winning smile, hoping to charm her, not that I really expected a smile back in return. Her expression, however, turned from mundane annoyance to something akin to a piqued turkey in a restrictive pen, the kind who didn't get her morning oats. "You can't be serious!" she shrieked, clutching her clipboard as if its very fibers would set the course for her future of mundane complaints. But her bewilderment only encouraged me further. This was going to be a challenge, one I was not going to surrender without a sprinkle of goat-shaped drama. I knew deep down that her definition of livestock probably included all things that move and breathe beyond her strict code of conformity. My goats were not just mere pets. They were part of my nonprofit petting zoo dedicated to therapeutic interactions for youths in need. I imagined Pam's face in agony, contemplating exactly how therapy goats could infiltrate her meticulously manicured, beige-painted realm. "Pam," I added sweetly, "remind me again, when was the last time you offered joy to someone?" With a theatrical flourish, I gestured to my goats, inviting them to amplify my retort with bleats, as if they were my adorable, judgmental sidekicks. As expected, Pam's reaction was a blend of outrage and contempt. The poor woman's eyes darted about as if searching for an escape route from this absurd predicament. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a petting zoo," she quipped, her voice dripping with disdain. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. She had caught wind of my nonprofit only through her relentless snooping for dirt on the neighbors, and the way she dismissed the whole purpose behind my work was like watching a cat recoil from water. I decided then and there that I would seek absolute vindication through this ridiculous drama. I was going to take a poll in our neighborhood. Yes, folks, I thought to myself, I would take the glorious gamble of finding out how many people actually love the idea of goat yoga and supporting therapeutic causes, which was basically the weapon I'd developed to crush Pam's oppressive reign. The following week, armed with pamphlets and rainbow-colored snacks, Jasper sprang into action, rallying the neighborhood like a laid-back general, preparing for a jovial war against HOA constraints. Grocery store pencil in hand and spirit on high, he knocked on doors, spreading the word about our initiative, Goats Got Your Back Community Therapy Fund. His charisma always captured attention, much like the goats themselves. Neighbors started to rally around, some enthusiastic about goat yoga, others simply bemused by Pam's relentless absurdity. I envisioned a grand spectacle of yoga mats, unfurled on the grassy common space, surrounded by the public's laughter, and the low, peaceful bleating of my goats becoming the soundtrack of triumph. Lo and behold, our community meeting arrived, and a veritable sea of supporters filled the park, mats lined up like a colorful rainbow against the backdrop of a cloudless sky. Pam stood at the front, livid and disheveled, while I beamed from ear to ear, my goats prancing and blooming in the sunshine right next to me. "These goats are prohibited," Pam sputtered, desperately aiming to reclaim her semblance of order. But the spirited crowd erupted into laughter, punctuating her authority with every chuckle. Someone even shouted, "They're therapy goats. They help kids." The tide had turned. And in that moment, as the air crackled with energy of community resistance, it became abundantly clear. Pam's clipboard of doom was no match for the overwhelming power of joy, therapy, and a barbaric cavalcade of goats. The kicker came when Jasper and I decided to host the first ever Goat Yoga with Pam event, complete with a challenge. For each hour she remained at the event, the community would donate $1 to my nonprofit. Pam, against her will, was suddenly tethered to the very goats she claimed as violators. I could almost hear her eyeballs roll in frustration, each bleat from my goats, a mock serenade of pastoral rebellion. Happy to help, I winked at her, as if to say, as long as you're here, Pam, might as well have some fun. As the session commenced, with Pam stuck between my goats and a huddle of yoga mats, she realized, perhaps for the first time, that her rigid control was only as powerful as the laughs and memories one could make. Did she ever expect it? Perhaps not, but the grin on my face and the bleats echoing around us made it all so very clear. Sometimes the biggest karma has 4 legs. The day of goat yoga with Pam dawned bright and sunny, which was ironic because I was fairly certain it would be either the death of her apoplectic reign or a new chapter of comical defeat. The grassy expanse at the park blossomed into a vibrant tapestry of color as yoga mats sprawled like psychedelic flower petals, each one claiming their territory in wild defiance of Pam's stuffy rules. As I welcomed our attendees, families with giddy children, curious dog walkers eyeing the tumultuous event like it was the latest gladiatorial showdown, I couldn't help but gloat silently. Pam was about to face the gauntlet of cuddly chaos she'd tried so hard to squash. It was deliciously ironic, like smuggling a cupcake into a low-carb convention. You knew it would cause a stir, but it was just too good to pass up. Pam, meanwhile, was stationed at the front, her frosted bob reflecting the sun like a chrome-plated piece of office furniture. She looked like a neon sign flashing doomed authority. As I unrolled my own yoga mat with a flourish, I noticed several of my neighbors whispering and glancing her way, a mix of amusement and anticipation painting their faces. Remember, everyone, poses are encouraged, but so are bleats of joy, I called out, my voice echoing across the gathering. The goats, in true diva fashion, punctuated my words with predictable bleats, their enthusiasm more contagious than any viral dance challenge circling the internet. I could almost taste Pam's resentment from the opposite end of the field. As the masses settled into position, Pam stood tethered by a leash made of her own uptightness. With every goat prancing closer, the look on her face shifted from irritation to sheer bewilderment. What resembled a defensive stance quickly transformed into apprehensive curiosity as one particularly nosy goat named Zinnia sniffed at her pastel blazer. Is there any rule against goats invading personal space? She sputtered, a hint of panic fluttering in her icy blue eyes. But everyone was too busy laughing to offer her a solid answer. Zinnia trotted around her, clearly leading the charge of sweet rebellion, making Pam wish she could simply evaporate into the ether, right there on her own personal battlefield. With the sun hitting its zenith, we transitioned into the first pose, downward goat. I couldn't help but channel that inner kid energy, delighting as hooves clattered around, filling the air with laughter, and of course the inevitable, "Are they peeing?" queries from audience members. Jasper, ever the committed cohort in this goat-centric saga, couldn't suppress a chuckle. "Pam," he called out, "you totally need to embrace the experience. Just breathe in the, essence of goat." The crowd exploded into laughter. Pam, meanwhile, remained stiff, her limbs unwilling to join the delightful chaos around her. The very thought of loosening up around my cereal box-sized Caprine friends felt more outlandish than her custom-scented candles, and everyone could see it. Halfway through the class, I noticed more shameless disruption from my goats. They were getting into the spirit of the exercise far better than Pam. A couple of children provided an impeccable backdrop, giggling uncontrollably as one goat, in particular, called Taffy, decided Pam's leg would make a perfect place to rest. Her squawk of surprise filled the air, a brief sparkle of humanity piercing her stern facade. I can't believe this is This is ridiculous, she stammered, and for the first time, the tension in her voice seemed to deflate a fraction. I should have gotten a government grant to ban goats from existence. Some rhetorical power she had, but the sight of her wrestling with Taffy was on its way to a social media highlight reel, and I savored every second. Then a most unexpected thing happened. As I guided the group through the final poses, and my goats engaged with the attendees with newfound enthusiasm, I noticed the crowd rallying around Pam, offering encouragement instead of contempt. "Pam, just try one goat pose," someone shouted, barely managing to stifle another wave of laughter. I didn't think I'd ever seen a blush creeping across her round cheeks before, and it was as beautiful as watching a dawn break through a heavily clouded patina. Maybe, just maybe, the curtain of her rigid personality was beginning to lift, woven anew by bleats and bemusement. By the end of our sesh, which, let's face it, could even rival a Broadway production for sheer entertainment, Pam found herself smiling. Or at least grimacing less, which in her world was akin to a back row standing ovation. "Okay, all right, I concede. These goats are, tolerable," she finally confessed, prompting uproarious laughter to erupt across the lawn. I grinned widely, feeling the sweet taste of victory on the tip of my tongue as the event wrapped up and folks scuttled over for blood donation slips next to our participation forms for the nonprofit. Their enthusiasm for supporting the goat yoga session echoed loudly in the air, and for the first time, Pam did not see them as mere nuisances but rather as joyful creatures, the very essence of therapy. As the crowd dispersed in joy, I caught a glimpse of Pamela, still standing there, knee-deep in bleat-induced chaos. I swayed over and offered her a hefty cup of chamomile tea I'd promised to brew if she stepped into the wild world of goats. "So, Pam," I said sweetly, "will we see you at the next goat yoga class?" She rolled her eyes, but took the tea with a reluctant smile, successfully deflating the armoring board she'd built around herself. Who knows? Perhaps Pam Hawthorne would become our unlikely advocate. After all, who would think that a little humor, some goat therapy, and a sprinkle of neighborhood spirit could turn royalty back into a neighbor? Hope springs eternal, don't you think? In the aftermath of our Goat Yoga with Pam event, the air was thick with laughter and self-congratulatory triumph. If I hadn't already coined the term victorious Goatville, I would have done so in a heartbeat, as I died with joy watching the kids chase the goats while adults discussed the feasibility of implementing goat therapy for stressed-out colleagues. The energy was palpable, a collective rebellion against Pam's reign of unyielding HOA restrictions. However, I caught myself analyzing how Pam, queen of government regulations, was suddenly not so much a queen as a queen bee, one buzzing reluctantly in a field of daisies. Would she truly change? Or would my goats merely remain a wild card in her tightly managed deck of community rules? The sassier side of me shrugged. After all, Karens are notorious for rewriting rules faster than I could say goat cheese. The next day dawned considerably warmer, as if the universe itself was celebrating our little coup. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from the community group chat that had exploded into a digital cacophony. I relished the samplings of joy as messages flew across the screen, effusively commending the goat's antics. Even Pam had ventured to participate, albeit reluctantly. "I hate hay, but I can't get that goat resting on my leg out of my mind," she typed, a post that read more like an olive branch than an indictment of my petting zoo endeavors. But let's not get too excited. Just because Pam was partaking doesn't mean she was quite on board with my cause. Surely there was still room left on the crotchety Karen Expresses, now that she seemed to be riding it about halfway. Jasper popped by with a few scones he'd baked, his warmth wrapping around me like a fluffy blanket, and while I munched away, he recounted how he had compiled a mountain of testimonials from parents thanking us for the therapy sessions. "They love your goats, and we might just be on the brink of getting some of your therapy ideas funded through community grants," he exclaimed while tossing his curly hair dramatically. I could hardly contain my excitement. Suddenly, not only was I advocating for kids, but I might be setting the groundwork for a legitimate nonprofit that could transform lives. one bleat at a time. However, my reverie was interrupted as I envisioned Pam drooling over her latest HOA regulations with a sense of haunting dread. How could we push forward while keeping her from setting out to snuff out my goats like the smoldering embers of a forgotten campfire? Determined to keep Pam on board, I decided to host a second aid event called Pet the Goats, Help Kids to hook her in deeper. I crafted a charming flyer of a bespectacled goat wearing a tiny superhero cape, turned it into an animated GIF, and loaded it into our chat. Join us for fun activities centered around therapy goats. Kids will learn empathy, connection, and what endearing trouble they can get into right under our noses, I typed. Sure, some might consider it overly cheesy, but if Pam was truly leaning towards opening her heart to the wonders of goats, I couldn't let that enthusiastic energy slip past. I was on a mission to turn a feral zoo into a cultivator of hope right in her bland HOA kingdom. Who knew she could act like more than a restrictive policy hawk? The anticipation for the Pet the Goats, Help Kids event shot through the roof as I watched increasing numbers of families RSVP. Yet lurking beneath my excitement was the familiar anxiety of Pam's tongue lashing. I tried to flex my own flexible stance against her impending tyrannical gaze. Sure enough, as we set up the event in the park, Pam arrives in a pasty ensemble more suited for an expired nostalgia than a pet-friendly occasion. But instead of her piercing stare of disapproval, I was stunned to catch a glimpse of her raising an eyebrow. Perhaps, just perhaps, an invitation to join this friendly commotion. This better not be another raucous affair, she warned, as she glanced at the growing crowd. I inwardly chuckled, pondering all the things a fervent goat whisperer could say to coax her into brighter moments. I watched, slack-jawed, as the event unfolded in joyous chaos. Kids ran, laughter erupted, and goats strayed across tables, seeking the fresh carrot stroganoff we'd brought for them. What surprised me the most, though, was Pam's footing. She was no longer firmly planted on that uptight pedestal, grimacing at the hovering chaos. In fact, as a particularly adventurous kid dashed over, laughter spilling from their lips as they reached for waffles, a goat who simply would not be ignored, Pam caught herself chuckling. Was I dreaming? The queen bee was potentially thawing. Suddenly, her authoritative air seemed to loosen ever so slightly, and she asked with genuine curiosity, "Can I, pet one of them?" The crowd hushed, eyes darting between her and my goats, as if waiting for the universe to give them a sign as mighty as an exclamation mark. "Of course, Pam," I exclaimed, waving my hands theatrically in the air. "Meet Bubbles. She's our biggest little diva here," I grinned, stepping back to give her space. With hesitant confidence, Pam slowly crouched, extending a hand towards Bubbles, who graciously leaned in for a nuzzle. Her tight-lipped facade seemed to crack, if only a smidge, as the corners of her mouth crept upwards into what I could only describe as joy. The crowd erupted in cheers, and I found myself caught in a whirlpool of laughter and excitement. Who knew that Pam would buy into that crazy notion that goats and kids could provide more than just silly antics? The karmic wheel had started to turn, the blessings of a therapeutic community spilling from every beaming face. As the day wound down, I stood surveying the delightful mayhem, feeling triumphant. I had no idea where this newfound harmony with the former title holder of the HOA was headed, but I certainly wasn't ready to let her off the hook. Pam had officially crossed the threshold from foe to neighbor, a topic splendidly fit for future conversations. This was a new chapter, a goat-enhanced era, where Pam might even learn to lace nachos with goat cheese. What other surprises lay waiting in the realms of our budding partnership? Would we bring goat therapy into every home on our sleepy little street? Only time, and perhaps a few determined goats, would tell. As the sun dipped low in the sky, an infectious energy hung over Pumpkin Patch Park, where our Pet the Goats, Help Kids event had truly become a spectacle worthy of Broadway. Children were blissfully scattered across the grassy expanse, giggling as they scrambled to cradle the goats or dancing around them in a joyful frenzy. I took a moment to observe, feeling like a proud mother hen, or perhaps I should say, proud goat herder. Jasper, clad in his most colorful graphic tee depicting an exaggerated goat flexing its muscles, was busy leading a line of eager kids in the Goat Olympics, mimicking their antics as they leaped from hay bales to hay bales like furry little Olympians. I couldn't help but feel as though we had become the true underdogs of the HOA saga, flipping the script on Pam and turning her drab community regulations into a vibrant celebration of inclusion and support, all spearheaded by my beloved goats. But just as I was feeling like the queen of this chaotic kingdom, the shadow of Pam's pastel blazer loomed ominously, snapping me back to reality. The crowd began to dwindle as the sun began its descent. And there she was, clutching a half-eaten carrot in one hand and shooting smirks at the kids skirting too close to the potato salad table. "Lila, this is quite the ruckus," she stated, her voice carrying an odd, almost amused edge. "But can we talk about your petting zoo? The health codes, the insurance, there's protocol to consider." I turned, smirk firmly affixed on my face, and pointed to my goats, munching happily on fallen veggies. "Pam, let's agree on one thing," I quipped, leveling my voice at her. "As long as the goats can graze in peace, those protocols are simply agitated whispers from the menu of your proverbial control dish." Her eyebrows shot up, momentarily piercing through the laughter echoing in the air. This woman had become a force to contend with, not merely because of her authority, but due to her endearing attempts at banter, an upgrade I hadn't anticipated. As the night wore on and darkness enveloped the park, we gathered around a makeshift bonfire, warmed by its flickering light and emboldened by stories shared. I took the initiative to invite Pam for a more in-depth chat, maybe even a truce, beyond goat taming tips. Much to my bewilderment, she accepted and even offered her remarkably constructed cupcakes, albeit with a rather deliberate disclaimer of totally gluten-free that seemed to vibrate with excessive caution. "All right, Pam," I said, dipping into the light-hearted sauce that had served us so well all day. "How about we take this dynamic of ours down a notch? I mean, if my goats can entertain you with their charm, maybe I can finally break down that distinguishable wall you've built guarding your marshmallow center?" She blinked, considered her cupcake, and before I could even brace for pomp and circumstance, part of her nodded, plump cheeks rounding as the tiniest hint of a smile teased the corners of her lips. "Well, perhaps it could be an opportunity for some collaboration?" Her voice warbled in uncertainty, as if she were testing out a new pair of shoes that didn't quite fit. But hey, I was horny for alliterations. Why not let them catch on? As we made plans to join forces, I felt the weight of the world lifting from my shoulders. Yet just as day faded into night and hope began to bud, an unexpected villain emerged. A snap of thunder echoed in the distance, and I felt the chill of dread creeping in alongside the chill of the air. Was Pam going to backtrack? Had the clouds conspired against our newfound partnership? But it wasn't long before the darkened sky accompanied our laughter around the fire with inevitable rain. I held out a hand. "Not the ideal conditions for goat therapy, huh?" My voice sliced through the clamor and splattered vibrations, eliciting a smirk from Pam, who begrudgingly added, "Well, we did plan for rain." As the first drops began to fall, rather than scatter for cover, Pam and I both found a sincerity piercing through our shared amusement. "Let's take this event and use it to fortify our community, Lila." "Goat yoga on the lawn?" she proposed, her frosty authority cracking open into something warmer. My mind spun. A partnership felt almost revolutionary, with the sweet aroma of dreams freshly fainting. "How about a fundraiser for goat therapy?" I chimed, leaning in as playful sparks bounced off my emerald eyes. As we started to brainstorm ideas, the interplay of ridiculous and positive scenarios ignited a passion for uplifting our community, tethering us tighter with every shared laugh and outrageous endeavor. The warmth between us glowed brighter than the embers in the bonfire. Our laughter blurred under the rumble of rain, and I could almost hear the sound of familiar goat bleats echoing encouragement. Hadn't our goats begun this journey toward mending the tattered fabric of the HOA that had once choked our shared neighborly existence? Could we truly transform our little slice of suburbia into a realm of compassion and acceptance, guided by goats who dared to dance around wild philosophical debates about lactose intolerance? What would happen next? Could we draft a new shared set of bylaws that revolved around joyful living? Amidst a veritable storm of potential, now made delightfully absurd and dauntingly exciting, the story of our community was beginning to rewrite itself in the strangest, most wonderful ways. What more awaited us around the corner? The next day felt deliciously surreal, as I awoke with a renewed sense of purpose and a faint trace of anxiety still tingling through my veins. I had never pictured myself teaming up with Pam Hawthorne of all people, her frosted bob always perfectly in place, and now we were plotting a goat revolution. It was like watching two unlikely heroes emerge from an absurd comic book, just waiting to take their town by storm. I chuckled as I thought about how this had all started with the goats causing an alleged unbridled chaos in our otherwise meticulously manicured lawns. I bounced out of bed, ready to brew a pot of coffee strong enough to fuel my hopes and aspirations, or, at the very least, drown out any residual doubts. With a steaming mug gripped tightly in my hands, I glanced over at my goats, doing what they did best, devouring hay with an adorable determination that could charm the socks off a scarecrow. After tossing on my favorite oversized sweater with cartoon goats frolicking across the front, I decided today was the day everything shifted. This was no longer about Pam popping up out of nowhere like a buzzkill in my goat-infested garden. It was now about uniting our neighborhood in joy, laughter, and maybe more than a dollop of goat milk. I grabbed my phone, eager to share our plans, complete with ridiculous goat-themed slogans, on the community bulletin board. Jasper was over in a flash, adorned in the same beastly goat tee, but now, with the added touch of a mud-splattered canvas satchel filled with colorful crafting supplies for the Goat Olympics endeavors. We both knew that our audience reached beyond just kids. Adults needed a bit of whimsy too. "We'll send out flyers, co-host the fundraiser," Jasper shouted, excitement radiating from him like sunbeams in a field of daisies. There was something thrilling about having a partner in goat crime, especially one with a beard that could double as a goat's fluffy neck if we ever found ourselves short on farm hands. With both of us cranked up on caffeine, it felt as though a surge of creativity flowed through our veins like a sugar rush at a birthday party. By lunchtime, the flyers were a colorful chaos of goat illustrations and promises of goat yoga and gemstone cupcake fundraising. I couldn't hold back my chuckles every time I glanced at the slogan, "Believe in therapy." Pam even added her own personal touch, with tiny glittering goat hoof prints adorning the sides of our postings, causing folks to stop and gawk. "This is pure genius, Lila. I never knew you had such graphic design skills," she commented, as her eyes danced with excitement over our shared vision. Her previous insistence on upholding dreary HOA regulations was evaporating right before our eyes, replaced with a newly forged determination to blend knitting circles with goat cuddling and perhaps a dash of wild abandon. As we spread the word, laughter and lightness became a viral hit in our sleepy suburban enclave. The atmosphere shifted from one of survival against the pompous Pam to embracing her eccentricities and welcoming unexpected joy. Neighbors, who previously grumbled about my goats, now grinned at my rainbow-hued flyers, running into me at the mailbox or the grocery store, offering unsolicited suggestions to expand our goat empire into whimsical parades and bake sales. "Have you thought about goat grooming days?" Mrs. Henderson from 3 doors down chirped, her usual knitted frown replaced by the gleam of potential. Suddenly it felt as if we were stirring the dust from far too long status quo and transforming it into frolicsome clouds to float into new frontiers. As the days blurred together, the anticipation surged like a tidal wave, booming with delicious possibility. Pumpkins danced on wooden crates, jars of honey gleamed in the sun, and registration for Believe in therapy soared higher than a goat leaping over a fence. Attendees from all over the neighborhood RSVP'd enthusiastically, some even arriving with creative goat-shaped headbands. I laughed as I imagined our park filled with happy kids and smiling adults, the embodiment of a community rediscovering joy through my bleeding brigade. Even Pam and I started exchanging playful banter, laden with inside jokes that only goats could possibly inspire. The sanctity of our neighborhood had morphed into an all-embracing realm of goat-filled fun. It was almost too good to be true. Finally, we approached the day of the Goat-tastic fundraiser with equal parts nervousness and excitement. The park transformed into a vibrant spectacle that would make even the stiffest HOA rules do a double take. As children donned their goat-themed accessories and adults exchanged lighthearted banter, I looked around and realized the community spirit had blossomed in ways I had never imagined. And then, as if the universe wanted to crown our collective efforts with the ultimate punchline, it happened. Just as I began my speech, clutching a gleaming goat-shaped trophy, a goat leaped audaciously onto the podium, stood proudly, tail held high, as if announcing the start of its own stand-up routine. Laughter erupted, outshining any anxiety I had left, realizing we had indeed orchestrated something spectacular, complete with goat antics. And as I stood there, bathed in joy with Pam beside me, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we had come from our backyard bickering and petty HOA disputes. What began as a seemingly absurd mountain mission filled only with tangled authority had blossomed into a festival of unity, laughter, and, yes, a few goat calamities. Indeed, I was ready for whatever came next. What new adventures awaited us in this remarkable saga, once ruled by a disastrous feud with an HOA Karen? Would I need to name more goats sheltering in my backyard triumvirate? I chuckled at the thought, facing my newfound friend Pam, knowing that our shenanigans had only just begun. As the sun peaked high above the Goat Ba Rabash celebration, a cacophony of laughter and bleats rolled across the park, blending harmoniously with the quintessential sounds of suburbia. I stood on the immodestly large podium, thanks to the ingenuity of my fellow neighbors who fashioned it from repurposed wood. Surrounded by a sea of smiling faces, it felt as if the spirits of community had resurrected in full force, armed with homemade goat cupcakes and expertly brewed goat milk lattes. I took a deep breath, feeling a rush of gratitude, a stark contrast to the overwhelming frustration I had experienced only a few weeks prior with the unyielding rules of the HOA and my number one nemesis, Pam. Little did she know that her quest to expunge my goats had unwittingly set the stage for a quirky, delightful revolution. Pam, decked out in her pastel blazer and quirky goat-themed pins, stood beside me, eyes sparkling with a mischievous twinkle. She whispered a promise so comically out of character, something about designing a goat-centric HOA newsletter. I couldn't help but stifle a laugh. The woman who once wielded her authority like a sword was now donning goat horns, engulfed in our newfound camaraderie. Suddenly, there she was, not the regent of regulation, but the queen of goat-themed fun, graciously accepting a trophy myself, and Jasper had crafted from a gilded pot and a stuffed goat plush. I was starting to think I might even have a contender for most unlikely throne in HOA history. The applause that erupted was deafening, drowning out any trace of past animosity. As we transitioned to the Goat Olympics, where kids showed off their skills in races against my goats, joy enveloped the crowd, reminding us all of what we'd almost lost. Simple, pure laughter. There was Isabella, a chubby toddler dressed in a bright yellow tutu, giggling as she clumsily waved a goat-shaped flag, while a curly-haired goat named Dolly frolicked nearby, clearly unbothered by the chaos around her. The jubilance precluded any concerns about Pam's past skirmishes. "Three-legged goat race!" I shouted, and cheers erupted like confetti being flung from the sky. Jasper joined me, our high fives resonating like we were on the crest of this wave of hilarity, celebrating the absurdity of our previous truth where Pam perceived my goats as mere nuisances. Between bites of delicious goat cupcakes, I observed Pam morph into an overzealous cheerleader, her voice rising an octave as she waved pom-pom-shaped hay bales. The other neighbors soon joined her, polishing off past grievances like stale bread, and they became participants in this playfully chaotic extravaganza. Mrs. Henderson sported goat ears with her comfy print hoodie, and the local newspaper correspondent snapped shots of Pam, myself, and a parade of ecstatic kids riding my gentle therapy expert goats. The act of capturing these moments felt like a living art installation, designed not for critique, but for heartwarming appreciation. With each passing hour, it seemed as though Pam's once iron grip over the HOA stretched and twisted through the air, unraveling into laughter and joy. Mid-celebration, as our goats gracefully ambled around the park watching their fans flourish, I spotted a fuming figure off to the side. It was none other than Karen, an older woman who had made it her mission to enforce all HOA decorum and had once led the charge against my beloved animals. Her jaw clenched as she muttered to her disheveled attire, swirling in pastel pink while assessing the revelry that unfolded in stark contradiction to her vision of order. A smile crept on my face. With each infuriated squint she threw our way, I felt an electrifying surge of triumph. Who knew my goats could transform into local celebrities, while sending uptight HOA members into fits of despair? The night culminated with a goat-themed karaoke extravaganza, complete with blaring music and impromptu performances that only a mixture of adrenaline and silliness could inspire. I strummed my guitar to some off-key rendition of I Will Survive, while my goats participated in what could only be described as bucolic choreography. As every note struck the air, another wave of euphoric release washed over me, and it was hard not to shine amidst the chorus of laughter erupting from all corners of the park. Even the newspaper reporters who began to frown at this jubilant circus slowly transcended into hearty chuckles, catching the infectious spirit of our evening. The entire bizarre day felt like a fairy tale, where goats took center stage and camaraderie flourished as they dodged all forms of entitlement. And while the event shifted from lighthearted mirth to spontaneous goat-flavored disco moves, I found myself wondering if we might all just become the characters of a wonderful story, one where the fight for joy somehow trampled over rigid HOA ordinances with heartwarming absurdity. Could this be a new chapter where goats became the beacons of community therapy, unearthed by mischief and mutual love? Whatever the answer, one thing remained clear. It was a goat-tastic world after all.